Good morning. My name is Terry Mottershead. I'm the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law, and really delighted to be with you today. Most particularly, I'm delighted to introduce to you Karen Sandler, who, as you can see on the slide in front of you, is a partner and the Chief Knowledge and Innovation Officer at Gilbert and Tobin. I also have the additional pleasure of saying that Karen is the co-chair of the CLI Advisory Board. So she's someone who is near and dear to us, and that makes this one a particularly special session. So this session is, as you can see, how to select your innovation project. We just thought that this was a session that, with so many innovation projects going on everywhere at the moment, it was such an opportunity to visit with Karen, whose firm and she personally have a leading reputation in this area, and to really have this opportunity to share that experience with one of our special interest groups, the Innovation and Legal Ops Leaders Special Interest Group, but also with the public more broadly, and obviously within Australia, New Zealand, and internationally as well. Welcome, everyone, and Karen, welcome, and over to you. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Thank you, Terry, and lovely to be here this morning on a Monday morning. Today's session, as Terry mentioned, is how to select your innovation project. So please feel free to ask questions via chat, and I'll, of course, try my best to answer them. But basically, I'm hoping it will be a very interactive session. Hopefully you'll get some really good insights off the back of it. And yes, we might as well start. So, in terms of the agenda, what I'm going to take you through is guiding your projects with an innovation pipeline. And for those of you who aren't familiar with an innovation pipeline, hopefully by the end of the session you will be. But then it's obviously important to understand how your ideas actually enter into an innovation pipeline, and how you go about prioritizing those innovation ideas, which can also be plentiful. I'll then look at how we will manage your innovation pipeline with guardrails to keep you on track. And I feel quite passionately about this particular part of the presentation, in that you really need to have guardrails when you are thinking about your innovation agenda to enable you to go down a path which is best suited to your organization and aligns from a strategic value point of view. And then I'll spend some time at the end around prioritizing the right projects through your innovation pipeline. We all have finite resources and, limited time, limited budget. So it's trying to get the best almost bang for your buck, or the best, alignment with your organization, given you can often have, many innovation ideas. And I'll give you some insights into how I've seen teams do this, and also how we think about it internally at G&T. So just a little bit more around my background. So I obviously lead the legal service innovation team at Gilbert and Tobin. So that team is made up of a variety of teams, all the way from data and analytics to legal transformation and legal project management. And really the team's mandate is to look for and drive efficiency and effectiveness within legal service delivery. So we work with our lawyers hand in glove to basically optimize legal service delivery for our sort of clients at G&T, and also really upskill our lawyers as well as they require new capability and the like, in the current world in which we operate. And then also I lead G&T Innovate, which is our client-facing consulting capability, and we work with both clients of G&T, but then also some clients that are not actually existing legal clients, in transforming their own in-house legal operations. And that has been a really interesting area over the last sort of 3 to 5 years, and it's grown significantly. Obviously, law firms can face challenges around how they best service their clients in a changing world. But similarly, in-house teams also sort of focus on that. And have new and significant demands from the business in the compliance-driven world in which we operate. So we focus extensively on that as well. So moving on to the first part of the session, guiding your innovation projects with an innovation pipeline. So I don't know if this is familiar to many, but basically what we mean by an innovation pipeline is really a framework in which you can take ideas that you have or that you've received and move them through a pipeline to enable you to get to a solution. So you'll see over there that obviously the funnel is really large at the outset, where you've got lots of different ideas. But as we all know, often those ideas aren't in alignment necessarily with what you want to push forward in terms of your innovation, your innovation sort of solutions or whatever that looks like. So it tends to get smaller as you move through your funnel. But the first idea is that you really want to identify your innovations and what those ideas might look like, and you can see that, and that sort of blue arrow in there is how we think about innovation internally at GNT and how I work with my clients in that space. So it's basically an innovation framework that we have developed, and it leverages a lot of the well-known methodologies out there, whether it be lean, whether it be design thinking. But you basically identify your innovation ideas, and then you really get to understand those innovation ideas and really measure them. You want to obviously get that baseline, and I'll talk about that, but you want to get that baseline of your idea as well. And then you move through a process of ideation using design thinking methodologies, and then you move into a solution that you might be comfortable with. But again, not everything that comes into your funnel or your innovation pipeline is going to come out the other side. And that's because you might get to identifying your innovation, but then you might realize at the understand and measure phase that in fact, this is something that you don't wish to pursue, or for example, isn't done as frequently as you might need it to be done, or alternately is something that is already well dealt with in another part of your organization. So you might find at that point in time it falls down. And that's why you can see I've got over there those checkpoints, because it's really important that once you've got all those ideas, and we'll talk about how ideas come in there, but once you've got those ideas, you go through various checkpoints to really think about whether this is something you want to proceed with. Because everything that you do has obviously an opportunity cost, and any amount of investment you put in a particular idea will then impact other ideas in there. And I'll talk about how you can think about that further on with guardrails. So as I said, obviously you've got this concept of like an innovation pipeline or a funnel, but what does this actually look like in practice? I often get that question. And really all we are talking about over here is storing ideas in a centralized idea register to keep track of those ideas as you move through that pipeline. Some might drop off, some might enter, but the idea is that you've actually just got that centralized repository. And it can be as simple, and I've seen this, it can be as simple as an Excel document. I've even seen it in a Word document, although to be honest, I wouldn't recommend that. I think Excel is a far more functional tool just because you can apply filters, and you also want to see which categories that they relate to. So for example, if you've got some innovation ideas that relate to capability development, or if you've got some innovation ideas that relate to the build of a technology solution, or in respect of a particular work type, by categorizing it means that you'll be able to see at least what categories your ideas tend to relate to, and if you've got too many maybe sitting in one category versus another category. SharePoint lists can often be really good. I mean, you can put it in and then apply Power BI at the background, so you can actually see in a data visualization way what the ideas look like and what ideas you have and how progressed they are. But there are some dedicated innovation tools or pipeline management tools, for example, Spark R, which is developed by Atlassian. Again, really depends on your appetite for this. There are lots of dedicated bespoke tools out there, but again, I think you can achieve really great things. I mean, we have ours sitting in a SharePoint online register, and we've got Power BI sitting behind it. So, that's the approach that we've taken. But again, depending on the volume, complexity, whatever you want to do, Excel might be a perfectly usable tool for that. And the one thing to think about as you proceed on that basis is how the team or your organization engage with that register. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but certainly at the outset, you want to think about who has access to that register. And there's two schools of thought. I mean, some consider that it should be your immediate people that you are working with. So, for example, in my world, my team that works in the transformation space typically have access to the register, but there is a part, the Power BI component we often open up to the broader organization as well. So it really depends what you want, but you also want to think about the permissioning on that, because you want this to be a single source of truth, and you want it to be accurate and consistent in respect of the innovation ideas. And the reason why you want to think about this so carefully is there is nothing worse than for you to be told a year later by someone that no one ever got back to them in respect of an innovation idea, if you've gone down the crowdsourcing route, and I'll talk about that more. So you do want to at least put all your ideas in there, possibly acknowledge those ideas, because people want to believe that they have been heard if they have submitted the idea. If you aren't really rigorous in the way in which you engage with the register or people having access to it, if you've got too many or people can delete easily, you might not be able to give people the recognition they deserve, or alternately keep them updated in terms of innovation ideas. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, if there are any questions, please let me know via the chat function and I will have a look at that. In terms of now moving on to how do the ideas enter your innovation pipeline. So there's this concept of a top-down and bottom-up approach. And just to give you a bit of color as to how we've thought about it in the past is we did about sort of 6 or 7 years at Gilbert and Tobin, about 6 or 7 years ago, we did a systematic review of our major processes. So we took the view that we would look at any of our processes which account for a significant number of revenue. We had basically a particular materiality threshold in place, and we would map them. So for example, we mapped share acquisitions, of which we do a lot of them within the organizations. Initial public offers were another one. Some of the big sort of disputes and regulation matters. And through that, you can identify areas or pain points that require, some work or some innovation. So you can go down that path of really being quite systematic in the way in which you approach things, but really take those major processes that that if you actually, achieve, innovation in respect of some of those pain points, you will actually have quite significant benefit and return on investment within your organization. But then we also, on the flip side, encourage those ad hoc bottom-up opportunities. So we certainly do not believe, and I'm not a believer of the fact that all innovation needs to come from leaders. Absolutely not. In fact, I believe some of the best innovation comes from all levels within an organization, and all different sort of diversity of people as well. So we really encourage all the way from our summer clerks, graduates, and I've seen this but in the in-house context as well, where they really think about everyone as to sort of junior lawyers as well as senior lawyers and how they can contribute. So really those ideas, and we have this pipeline or ways in which they can submit ideas into the funnel. And again, you might wish to have a particular form that people complete. A while, and I'll go through it later, but we often run sort of innovation takeover events within the organization. Some of them might relate to app contributions. Some of them just might be give us your pain points, and that really encourages that culture of innovation internally within an organization. But it means that everyone can contribute. Everyone within an organization can feel that they are heard, and what you start typically find is there is lots of commonality between some of the pain points that come your way. So again, systematic review of processes can really be helpful in terms of getting those innovation ideas, which is far more structured and far more, I suppose structured in the way in which you review your processes. But then you can have those ad hoc ones, somebody at their desk just sort of encouraging people to think innovatively, think there must be a better way of doing that. And you can encourage that through an innovation pipeline. crowdsourcing has been, increasingly popular. And really, that's because you want to look beyond your own boundaries to gain access to ideas and knowledge and technology that might add, value to your organization. And what are we really driving at when it comes to crowdsourcing is really diversity of thought. So you really want to capture, everyone has different views on things. Everyone has different ways of looking at things. And it's actually that and bringing that together that becomes incredibly powerful. And when you are looking at innovation, I would encourage you to assemble your teams in that way so that you do have lots of that diverse thought to enable you to get the best outcomes. In terms of key principles of crowdsourcing, I just wanted to go through a few because I think this is quite important. So number one being, it's important to frame the type of projects or pain points you're looking at. And I can reflect back on about 4 years ago or so, or 5 years ago, when we started some of our innovation takeovers. And we basically said to the organization, the world is your oyster, come at us with your pain points. And the challenge with what we received was we received hundreds. So number one is you've just got the volume that you need to move through. And again, because I feel passionately around everyone needs to feel that they've been heard, it's important to then go back to those individuals and say, thank you for your idea. We're working through it and this is the way forward. If you leave it very open-ended, you are going to get pain points all the way from how you switch on your computer in the morning to some of the very legal pain points as well. So I would encourage you to really be a bit more thoughtful and, I suppose, instructive in the way in which you frame the pain points you are trying to receive. And as I said, the beauty of the systematic review of processes in respect of a particular matter type or whatever that looks like means that you get very structured in approach and you frame it in a quite considered way. But if you want to be a bit more open, all I would suggest to you is really frame it. These are the pain points we're looking at. How you engage with your fellow lawyers and also clients, for example, might be an interesting one. And what you'll land up getting over there is really around the collaboration piece. Because if you do frame it, like, for example, we were really trying to go for more of the legal pain points, but the reality is we got a lot of, we get frustrated when we can't join a Teams call or whatever that looks like. So really important to frame up what you're wanting. Otherwise, it just might be too big. And then you're going to be filtering that to other areas within your organization. Make sure you are sourcing from the right crowd. Again, this probably comes up and ties in with number one, depending on how you frame your innovation objectives. But you want to make sure that maybe it might, in some circumstances, it might be suitable to go out to everyone within an organization or within your teams. And it might be that if you're focusing on property-related innovation ideas, that you only go out to the property team and people that work alongside them, their stakeholders. So again, sometimes quality is better than quantity, and you should be mindful of that. It can be short sprints to encourage a focus on a particular area. It might be that you run a design jam or a hackathon in respect of a particular area. So, for example, if you are looking at property-related ideas, you might want to bring all the property team together into a room, and actually you can do a very contained sprint to enable you to get those ideas. And it actually also, because they're quite fun, they achieve quite a bit of momentum as well within an organization. You need to think about how you will engage with people. As I said, we've got some online forms, but then as part of our takeovers that we run regularly, we also had like post boxes when we were once in the office, but, we had post boxes that we bought that people could actually physically submit, and we put them, and we were really quite careful and thoughtful around where we placed the boxes. So we put them by the coffee machines, for example, and we actually got a huge amount of submissions through those boxes, because sometimes people don't necessarily want to pick up a form, or when they're online, when they're back at their desk, they're quite busy. And they're focusing on sort of business as usual. But when they're away, they might think, you know what, actually, I might want to submit this. And then you give them different options to enable that. So we've seen that being quite successful as well. Obviously, consider how you might use prizes or gamification to encourage uptake. Again, we found that to be quite successful. We've had winning ideas in apps competitions or whatever that looks like. It just by their very nature, lawyers are often competitive, so it just brings a little bit more fun into that. And we don't have massive prizes or anything, but it's just an acknowledgement, and often they are fun prizes like t-shirts that have been made for them or the like. Not all problems are presented or well suited to be presented to crowds, and that's really important. Obviously, if you are dealing with high risk business issues, compliance issues, or any sensitive business decisions, they might not be suitable for a crowd or to open it up more broadly to an organization. So obviously be mindful around that. In terms of just more broadly, once you've got this, you do need to be thinking about who will be responsible for actioning those items. So who will be your point of contact from your innovation team, or if you don't have an innovation team, who is driving this? It's really important that people feel that they've got a voice and that they've got someone that they can reach out to. So I just thought I might mention crowdsourcing on a large scale as a large scale example. My son, who is currently in year 6, he recently did his field of study on Lego. And I think during the process, I learned a lot about the Lego company and how it reinvented itself. And it's quite incredible from an innovation point of view. But I thought I might just mention this case study around Lego ideas. And you might be familiar with it. But basically, it's an example of crowdsourcing and how they use it to further develop and design their products. So there is a Lego Ideas website where the Lego community can submit ideas and then people vote on them. It's open to everyone aged 13 years and above, and they've had more than 28,000 submissions since 2008. And then what happens when an idea gathers 10,000 supports? It is then selected by Lego to review it, and they review those ideas, and then they pass it through sort of a manufacturing and sort of process, and they often actually develop Lego designs off the back of these. And it sort of says, it's helped them tap into a very massive pool of creativity, and obviously really focus on the user as well, which I'll get to. So once it's selected, reviewed and produced, the creator is given 10 copies of that particular product. So really that incentivization piece, and they get 1% royalty of the net sales. So they've done this across 23 different sets in the last 5 years, and 90% of them are sold out in the first release. So it's just a nice example of where you can engage with the community or people who typically use your products, and I'll get to that in a moment, to give you ideas. And it really encourages that diversity of thought because, everyone has their own perspective, which is really important. So just a nice case study. Often I find it's important to look at case studies more broadly within different industries, because often it's been dealt with in a slightly different way and you might need to change it slightly, but the themes and the principles are very similar whether you are relating it to another industry or the legal industry as well. Innovation hubs have also become quite prolific in recent years. You might have seen the innovation hubs that are increasingly being used in law to foster development of legal tech, so that when they bring legal technology companies together and then they get that useful feedback and they iterate on their products. So that's been quite a key theme. But basically, again, the key principles over here is bringing together diverse interdisciplinary teams to solve complex problems. So you might all be familiar with Amazon Lab 126, which was founded back in 2003 and was given the simple directive of reinventing the book, of which we got delivered the Kindle, which was launched in 2007 and was sold out in 5.5 hours. So it's just a nice example of when you bring people together for those innovation ideas, when you think about what you want to enter your pipeline, that is quite powerful. So what does all this achieve? What this all achieves, and when you think about crowdsourcing, when you think about engaging, whether it be a systematic review of your processes, you're going to bring the people that are close to those processes together. When you think about asking for ad hoc, bottom down, top down opportunities, again, you are going to be thinking about the various people that engage with the types of work or whatever it is on a day-to-day basis. And when you think about crowdsourcing, as long as you've you've gone to the right crowd, you are focusing on the user and you're trying to address the problem. So certainly from my perspective, I have a very, very large team across all the teams that I manage, but we are always working with the lawyers and with the various stakeholders, our clients as well, because ultimately it doesn't really matter what my team says. We might be able to manage it well, and we might have, thought leaders in that space, or we might understand the various methodologies. But the reality is, and many of us are lawyers, so we do have some insight. But the reality is we work always with the people that are doing the work on a day-to-day basis. So we focus on those user problems to make sure that we fully understand the problem before we actually move to any form of solutions or work out whether that is an innovation worth solving for. So in terms of managing your innovation pipeline with guardrails to keep you on track, and I'm just going to go through some examples of useful guardrails. And the first one is probably, if there's something you take away from today, I think it should be this. Why do you do what we do? Okay, so it is really important, and I touched on this in the beginning, it's really important for us to establish and align your legal transformation strategy, or for that matter, any innovation project that you are working on, to your overall firm or organizational strategy. There is no merit in trying to solve for problems that are not aligned to your innovation strategy. And where I see this as being very powerful is where you can actually align it to enable you to prioritize the innovation ideas. Because the reality is, you might get 10 or 20 or 30 or you might have 10 or 20 or 30 innovation ideas. Some will align more. They all might be useful and they all might get return. But again, to my point in that you have finite resources and finite time, finite budget, you need to then prioritize what you have. And if you look at it in the context of your strategy or what you are wanting to do as a legal team, what are you wanting to be known for as your legal team? You are best then able to prioritize that based on what you are able to, or what you are wanting to achieve. And it doesn't mean that some of them fall away. It just might be that some are prioritized over others because they have more alignment. So that's a really important one, and something, again, that is quite powerful when you think about what innovation project you might wish to select. Another thing to focus on is problems, not solutions. I think, as lawyers, we are trained to focus on solutions. That is what we are trained for. So that doesn't always marry up with the fact that one should really understand deeply the problem you are trying to solve for. I have been called into many in-house teams, for example, where they have implemented a piece of technology, for example, but actually they call me and they say, Karen, I've implemented this piece of technology, but it doesn't actually solve for what we wanted it to solve for. And that's because often there is insufficient time spent in the planning phase and in that problem understanding phase. It is really critical that you fully understand what your client's problems are, what you are trying to achieve, and then understand what tools you might be able to get you there, rather than saying, I know what the solution can be. Just to give you an idea, I mean, we're running a project at the moment, and I have been in the diagnostic phase, in sort of that problem phase and broader diagnostic, really getting a critical understanding as to what the deep sort of issues might relate to, so that we solve for it properly. And I've been in that phase for 4 months. So in some respects, the rest will fall into place if you spend enough time understanding what your problem is. The other thing to be mindful of is not every innovation idea requires technology. And I'll talk about that more, but there is a view often that technology is innovation, and I do not believe that. It definitely has a place. It definitely is an enabler, and often is the end result of some of the ideations and also understanding of your problems. But it certainly is not necessarily innovation. I mean, we've done some amazing capability uplift programs, both internally and for clients. And in my view, that is absolutely innovation, because you are innovating your people, which is at its very heart probably the most critical when it comes to innovation, particularly in the environment in which we operate. But it didn't have a technology lens at all. So I just think, it's a word of caution over there, is that your innovation ideas don't necessarily all need to relate to technology. And that's when you think about your categorization piece, you might find that quite helpful. In terms of, I'm just looking over here, I think we might have a Q&A question. I don't know, Terry, if you've got anything. I can see.
Yep, I do.
Yeah.
Do you want to jump in and answer that now?
Yeah, that's fine. So what strategies do you use to keep the team on track, addressing the problem and not heading off on relevant or irrelevant tangents? That's a great question. It can be tricky to do that because people also have preconceived ideas and assumptions as to where things need to go, and that is challenging. So I think there's a couple of things in that. I think you do need to have some level of diversity in teams, because if you leave it to one or two people and they're all the same, the problem is you're going to go on those tangents more regularly. But I actually think the most important thing is to have check-ins. Because as long as you've got somebody, and you need to have a leader on that team, you need to have somebody who is almost governing that process, and also has enough understanding as to where the tips and basically the traps are in respect of exactly what you've mentioned over there. It can be quite challenging, but basically to keep them on track, you need to really have the regular check-ins, understand what you are doing, and also, have somebody there who has enough understanding to say, you know what, I don't think we should go down that path, or that path might not be the best way forward. So yeah, those regular check-ins, and that goes back to the pipeline. You want to have those check-ins in there. But again, it's reminding people around not focusing on the solution and rather focusing on the problems. But again, a good leader, regular check-ins, I think actually goes a long way to helping those, and also having the right team members up front. And I spend a lot of time when I'm putting together innovation, ideas or initiatives, as to who should actually be involved in it, because your team members, ones that will go down that tangent, ones that might not. Again, if you can try blend the two and try have ones that really are a bit more thoughtful. The other way, and it's not always possible, is having some form of facilitation, external facilitation, to keep people on guardrails and they're on track. That can be helpful. So for example, just I'm not suggesting this, but I'm just saying, I've seen it work quite well. I have some of my team members and myself, which are on retainer with teams. And the reason for that is to keep them on track, to make sure that they are following the right path, and where they hit those hurdles, that they can come back, or they don't go down those rabbit holes. Hopefully that's answered the question. Feel free to, ask more as we progress through the session. But in terms of the next piece, applying a people, process and technology lens is really important in my view. Again, to my point, technology does not always mean innovation. Where I like to think about innovation is really on the people side of things. So how can you develop mindset, skill set and environments, the process. Again, this is really important. You need to make sure that your process is well and truly robust before you then start, applying technology or whatever that looks like. And the reason for that is because if you apply technology to a broken process, you only make that broken process far more inefficient. It almost puts it on steroids effectively. So there is a lot of work to be done in the design phase and that understanding phase up front, and process re-engineering, which you've probably heard of that term for those of you that haven't. It's really thinking or rethinking your processes to make them optimal, and you can do that without then applying technology initially. And then you take the process which you say, okay, so this is my current process, this is the current state. This is where we would like to get to. This is the holes that we see in the current process. And then you'd add all the additional layers on top of that, including technology. But it's really important to do that. And I think if I reflect on when we have been called in to say, to organizations where they say the technology, for example, has not worked, because don't remember, a technology is an enabler. The process is often broken and hasn't had enough sort of TLC upfront and re-engineering. So basically, you're just applying technology to a broken process. So you do need to think about that. And that's where I actually think a lot of time and investment should take place up front. And that is why probably you also reduce your pipeline quite significantly, because sometimes you might say, it's not worth doing this at the moment, or I need to get some quick wins on the board and this is going to take too long, and we'll basically deprioritize it. Okay. In terms of your innovation ideas as well, I think it's always important to think about the road ahead and what does that look like. And what I mean by that is for you to sensibly prioritize innovation ideas and to make sure they align to your strategy. I think you do need to have both an understanding of where you're going in the next 6 months, but then you also probably need to have an understanding of where you're going in the next 2 years. And beyond that, I think it is very difficult in the environment in which we operate, because things change quite rapidly and we don't really know. I mean, who would have thought, a year and a half ago that we would be in the position we are in the world with COVID? So I think one needs to be flexible and open, but I do think you should have at least a bit of an understanding as to what that roadmap looks like and what you are trying to achieve to enable you to prioritize accordingly. In terms of now, that's quite a nice segue into prioritizing the right projects through your innovation pipeline. As I mentioned, you can't do everything. So coming back to this, hopefully everyone's got a good understanding off the back of that, those initial part of the session as to what we mean about an innovation pipeline and how you potentially take ideas through those innovation pipeline and what you need to think about as guardrails to those innovation pipeline. And I'm not, the purpose of this session is not to go through in detail around all these sort of 5 stages, but just for you to have awareness of them, because that is a process in itself and it's how you get to the end effectively. But as part of, starting your innovation ideas, as I said, it's really important to understand your project's baseline. And what I mean by that is understanding your current state. So what is it, when we talk about process mapping and the like, what is it that you currently do and how do you work? So when we talked about earlier that systematic review of some of those very key processes that accounted for in excess of 50% of revenue of the organization, we basically mapped out, for example, a share acquisition process from start to finish. And there are different schools of thought on mapping out processes. Some people think it is very important to do detail and more detail. I'm not of that view. I think you need to have sufficient detail to understand where your pain points are and to understand the process. But on the flip side, I actually think, and I've had experience of this in the past, where we were engaged in the process and the end result that we were provided with was literally like a 20-page process map. And I can tell you that 20-page process map still sits in a drawer somewhere and we never used it. So I think you need enough detail in process mapping, which gives you the various stages and who might do it. So you might have heard of swim lanes, which enables you to think about who actually does that process and that part of the process, and are they the right person to do that? And this is something that's very front of mind for legal teams, is do we have the right level resource doing that type of work? Could we push some of it to the business? Could we actually push some of it to more junior lawyers so that you can really open up that strategy? Could technology do some of it? And that's a conversation that is certainly taking place at the moment. But I think it is really important for one to do that quick assessment up front, but then also understand what you are doing in the process. So do process mapping to some degree, understand who is doing that process, and really on those process maps, identify where the pain points exist at a high level. And then you can delve deeper into, what the root causes are for those pain points. And I do actually think that that's an important piece to do, because sometimes and again, that requires probably more than one person on it, because understanding the root cause means that you really need to understand the user pain points And often if you keep on asking why, you get to the root cause. And if you solve for the wrong root cause, that can be problematic in terms of whatever solution you put in place. You can use a lot of tools to assess your project. I've just got a couple of them over here, but you might want to use interviews and surveys, observation. It can be quite powerful, but you actually get a lot from interviews and you get a lot from surveys as well, assuming that you've actually, sort of structured the surveys in a way that gives you the right outcomes. And then you might have heard of, in addition to process maps and the like, journey mapping workshops, where again, it takes you through the journey of how they actually engage with a particular process. And then you can understand how many people have that pain point, who is involved in that pain point. And again, probably critical over here is to engage with the people that engage with that pain point. So if you are looking at this from a legal perspective, I always tell this when we work with in-house teams, do not only engage with the lawyers, you need to engage with your stakeholders as well, because you are not solving this problem in isolation to what their experiences are. And even understanding what the pain points are from their side is often different to what the legal pain points are. So it's really important to bring those people together and use a variety of tools to assess your particular sort of project, which you can then feed into your innovation pipeline. Again, you want to think about which projects you want to prioritize. And this differs across the various organizations and how they think about innovation. You know, some might want to prioritize or identify projects which are quick wins versus those that are far more complex and long-term projects. I'm a fan of doing both, to be honest, because I do think, particularly organizations that are starting out on their innovation journey, it's important to build momentum. And what we're trying to achieve over here is really that culture of innovation. And so it's not, you know, I see benefit to obviously solving for particular innovation projects where you might get a return on investment, or you might be able to do work in a particular way that frees your lawyers up to do more high value work. There's all those benefits, but there is also just a benefit in exposing people to innovation and building that momentum internally, because we all need to change mindsets in a legal perspective. So it's a great way to do that. So I'm a fan of getting some of those quick wins, because sometimes if projects take, you know, I spoke to someone recently who told me they implemented a document management system and it took them 3 years. That was the only innovation project they did for that period of time. That can be quite disheartening for people. So I think it's really important to get some quick wins alongside those important projects that may take a long period of time to build that momentum. And I just mentioned over here, it's important to track all your projects in the pipeline, not just the ones that are the quick wins or whatever, some that take a long period of time or even have been put in the backlog. So, you know, you might want to periodically review them. You want to track your whole portfolio of innovation ideas, but you want to identify those ones that you are going to be starting with. And if you can make that visual to an organization, that is really quite powerful as well, because then they have a sense straight away as to what is progressing and what is not progressing, but is not forgotten. Again, that engagement piece is critical when you think about innovation internally within an organization. So some key considerations when prioritizing projects. Team resourcing and capability is obviously critical. So your team's capacity and also your organization's appetite for change needs to be considered when you determine your innovation pipeline at any given point in time. You know, you might wish to do something that fits beautifully in the strategic alignment side of things, but actually you know that your team or the organization is not up for that level of change. And I think that needs to be factored in when you are selecting your innovation idea. Team capacity is critical. I mean, I get to the point sometimes where I say there's an absolute halt, there are no further innovation projects going through, and I might have a backlog of 50 innovation ideas sort of sitting there or even more. But you also want to make sure that whatever you deliver is delivered well, because people, as quickly as they can gain trust in an innovation process, they can lose trust in an innovation process. So you need to make sure that you have enough capacity in your team to enable the process, because this is actually probably one of the biggest pieces or one of the biggest constraints on delivering projects effectively, in that you just get overwhelmed and there just isn't that time to actually do that proper design up front to understand the project, and it is rushed, and typically that doesn't result in a good end result. I would actually say to you, do less than more initially, particularly once you get your mojo and you're able to sort of engage in the process more regularly, than take on too much initially, because you will set yourself up to fail. Absolutely. As I mentioned, I've touched on this before, you need to consider the team of people that you need when selecting innovation projects. So, this is not too dissimilar to the question I had earlier. Make sure that you've got the right people on the matter to avoid those rabbit holes, to make sure that if somebody goes down that path, then others can bring them back in and have those regular check-ins as well. Is the capability in your team developing or developed? Obviously, there is a wide spectrum at the moment of innovation or, innovation teams, and also just capability. Many don't have innovation teams and still successfully promote and deliver innovation projects, which is absolutely fantastic. It is important, though, to think about the capability in your team, because sometimes it is just too hard to engage in a very large scale process, and you might need to think about what you need externally to support you. If I reflect on some of the innovation projects that we started 6 years ago, now I'm 7 years into the journey, I know what we should and shouldn't tackle. And now we've got a level of sophistication within our team to enable us to really tackle those significantly challenging projects. But 5 years ago, I didn't have that in the team. So it's really important to know your limitations and to be aware and alive to those issues, because what people don't realize, and I see this happening over and over again, is sometimes there is a reluctance sometimes to go externally for help or to keep it within a team. It costs you more in the end if you do not have the capability. If you've got the capability, absolutely fine. But it can be quite challenging if you don't have the capability, because often you just cannot deliver on that project. So really think about the capability in your team and what you might need to increase. What does the business case look like? Again, it's important to do a business case when you are thinking about those innovation ideas. I do not accept one innovation idea into our pipeline without there being a business case attached to it. And that's just for good governance as well. And it helps me make an informed decision as to what should go through and what shouldn't go through. The challenge sometimes in legal that we face is that there isn't great data. I think you can get around that by having good conversations with people and getting an idea. And actually, what I've found, particularly with our work in in-house teams, law firm obviously has some more billables and sort of reporting data that they can get access to, but often not the case in in-house teams. I do find, though, people who are doing that work on a day-to-day basis actually have a pretty good idea on what the baseline is. So, try get some of that data. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it is a baseline, and it is a baseline in which you can measure too. I know people don't like me saying this, but sometimes it can be useful to, for example, do some time recording for a very finite period of time, for 2 weeks, to get a baseline. Just get some baseline data to enable you to support your business case. Market research is really important as well. So this is particularly relevant when you are thinking about technology. When I reflect on, you might be aware, we built a verification tool about going on about 5 or 6 years, one of the first innovation projects that we embarked on. Verification being verification of large, documents in respect of an IPO, was a significant pain point for our lawyers. And we actually did that through the structured, process of doing process mapping. And that was done, as I said to you, sort of 5 years ago or so. We looked to the market at that point in time. There wasn't any verification software on the market. So we actually went down the path of building it our own. It was an enormous project, and we've been iterating that project for many, many years, or that technology for many years, and constantly getting feedback. The key learnings for us in that is, last year we actually sold the product to Latira, which is a US-based large legal software provider. But at that point in time, there was no product on the market. If I was doing that assessment today, there are quite a few products on the market. I wouldn't have gone down the path of building it. So I just think one needs to do your market research to understand what is available in the market. And I will tell you that there is obviously there's been a proliferation of technology in the legal space over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. So there is pretty much a product for everything. And sometimes trying to go down the path of building something yourself, one doesn't realize or think about the ongoing support that's required, the constant roadmaps that you need to, the sort of improvement ideas that come your way that you need to feed in. So it is worthwhile thinking about that before you engage on a project, particularly when it relates to technology. In terms of financial resourcing and budget, that obviously speaks for itself. You need to obviously do it within your means. So really have a good look at your project upfront and understand what the resourcing and budgets required are. Because again, it would be a real shame to move 3/4 way through your project to realize you've got no additional budget. And be realistic around what that budgeting look like. My experience is always more than what you experience upfront or what you expect upfront. Technology constraints. I'm a firm believer of you should look to see what your organization has by way of technology before you bring in a new technology. As we would all appreciate on the session, technology is becoming more and more complex in the world today, data breaches and the like. So technology teams are very cautious when it comes to bringing in new technologies, making sure that they are obviously, secure from a data perspective. So where you can use technology internally, one should see at least what is available in an organization. But sometimes it is absolutely not fit for purpose. And again, I'm not a proponent then of saying try to fit something around existing technology just for the sake of fitting it around existing technology. You want to absolutely use technology that is fit for purpose for your particular pain point. And that requires a real detailed look at the various technologies that you have and finding out whether or doing an assessment to see whether it actually fit for purpose. In terms of fast tracking your ideas, sometimes you are able to fast track ideas in an organization. And, there are sometimes ideas that come my way that I know we could do very quickly and they would have quite a significant return. So I might rethink the pipeline to add that into it. And that's something you should just retain in terms of some flexibility in resources and also capability to enable you to actually fast track that. So in terms of what does success look like, taking time to plan up front is probably a key theme that you've heard through the session today. Again, something that is not well planned often has not great outcomes. So I think it's important to take that time. And sometimes people get frustrated with that because it doesn't necessarily get you the outcome quickly. But again, it really makes you think about those underlying sort of pain points, what the root causes are, and really understanding your current state before you apply any solution in that. Once you get to the point where you want to prototype things or, you're looking at your solutions, I think it is really important to engage in pilots if you can. That really it encourages that engagement. You can use some of the change champions internally within your organization, but what it also does is it helps you spot the issues early on. You always need to factor in, and this is actually something you need to be very mindful as part of your innovation pipeline. And it leads nicely into this third point over here is iteration. When I reflect on, as I mentioned to you, that case study before, the verification tool that we developed, we pretty much, before we sold that to Latira last year, we were pretty much on our 6th iteration. This stuff takes time and it requires constant evolution and, sense checking to make sure it's going well, going back to your users, testing it. They'll come back to you with feedback and you should encourage that. because that is what successful innovation projects look like. However, as part of your pipeline, and if you're thinking about your capacity and resource constraints, you need to really think about that in the context of how much capacity you have. So don't think that, okay, because I'm going to roll out my innovation project tomorrow, then I've got 100% capacity beyond that. You will not have 100% capacity because you will need to constantly iterate those projects. There is not one project that I have been involved in, and we have launched hundreds, and that includes apps, projects, you name it, capability programs. It's quite varying in nature. We constantly have to go back to them, change them up, add new things. As law changes, you might need to change an app. You might find that somebody finds something confusing. You might need to add some additional notes, document automation. Law changes, you need to change that. So bear in mind that any project is not set and forget. You absolutely need to cater for that as part of your innovation pipeline and make sure you have capacity. So if you think you've got 100% capacity, you should really think about it, maybe allowing 20% or 30% capacity to enable you to iterate on your existing innovation projects. Again, just in terms of feedback, I think it's really important. You do need to have qualitative feedback. So client feedback, obviously increased awareness. People, there's a lot of power in getting quotes from people to sort of say, how well a particular process is going, etc. In terms, however, of quantitative feedback, there is definitely a view sometimes within legal is that we cannot get the right metrics and we cannot get the quantitative metrics. I do not believe that is the case. We can get to some level of baseline. And it is really important, like legal should not be any different to any other parts of the organization. We should be able to at least give an indicative understanding of what the time or cost saved is, because if we can't, we never know whether the innovation has been successful or not. It must have some form of return on investment. Some of it can be quantitative and some of it can be qualitative. And then you also want to engage with the employees and just generally clients on that as well. Has it saved dollars to your clients? Have you been able to pass on, some reduction in fees as well? So really important to do that as part of your, as part of what success looks like within an organization. And then we're sort of nearing towards the end, but what success typically looks like, or what people think success looks like, is often this linear line. And certainly from my experience, it is more like the yellow squiggle that you can see. It is going back, it is going up, it is going down. It's when you finish something, it's not finished, it's going back and iterating on that and improving it constantly. So I think it's always good to set expectation up front around what innovation success looks like. I think sometimes that's hard for people operating in the law because we are used to things being perfect, and that is a challenge in itself. And I think it's a mindset that we need to shift. I don't think there is any perfection in innovation. And I often say, even my lawyers sometimes say to me with, for example, implementing a new technology, they say, but we can't get to that 100%, we can't do it, and achieve that 100%. I say, but if it can achieve you even 40% efficiencies, that's far better off than where you are at the moment. So it's really shifting that narrative and understanding that actually there is no perfection in innovation. There is going to be times that you do not do things well. And I can tell you as well, we've had some failed innovation initiatives in the years, and we've learned probably more from the failed ones than what we have from the completed ones and the very successful ones. So allow yourself the space to experiment, really think about what innovation looks like and set those expectations up front. Don't try and set the expectation that it is going to be that linear line and that it's always going to go well and everything. Must accept that it is not going to always go well and that there's going to be things that you need to rethink, and those rabbit holes that you go down that you're going to have to come back out of, and it's going to look more like that yellow squiggle. So that is all from me. I don't know whether we want to open it up for questions. We allowed some additional time just because we thought it might be helpful if anyone had additional questions. I don't know, Terry, if people can unmute themselves or what you want to do at this stage.
Yeah, well, I think just throw them into the Q&A box because we can certainly pick those up. And while folks are thinking of them, Karen, I've got a couple that I'd love to throw at you as well, if I may. And
of course,
they kind of reflect a couple of the things that we hear over and over again. So I thought it'd be great to pull them out, and there might be questions that follow up on them as well. Sure. I think particularly as we're looking at innovating in, I'm going to say, the mid to small range of organisations and firms. So we may not have that innovation team, on site, but sometimes the hardest issues to address with the folks that are in senior management are very used to doing things a certain way, but folks really want to innovate and really want to start getting them excited about that. Where can you start with that? And I'm not suggesting these are folks whose minds you can never change, because there's probably not a lot you can do with those, but where folks are potentially open to it, but there's almost the fear factor, I think, there as much as anything else. Where do you start in that environment?
Yeah. Look, Terry, it's a really interesting call out, and something that I think is front of mind, and frankly, also front of mind in some big organizations too. Yeah. So it's not unique to small and mid organizations. But I think one needs to demonstrate some quick wins. And that is where I am actually a proponent. As I said to you, I feel quite strongly around those quick wins. And innovation doesn't need to be something that is absolutely massive as well. So I think sometimes people lose sight of that. They think unless you're developing a technology product or introducing a new CLM or whatever it looks like, I actually think that something really small. So if there's something that people identify in their day-to-day work, or let's take OneNote. I'm throwing OneNote out there as an example of a technology that I think is very good. It is part of the Microsoft suite. So most organizations have that. If you've got Word and Excel, you typically have the add-on of OneNote. And, let's say, for example, people are taking notes in a very manual way at the moment, using hard copy documents. I have seen people use OneNote. And for those of you who aren't familiar with OneNote, it is basically a digital notebook. But the fact that you can collaboratively share that with people that you're working on. So if you're working on a matter with somebody else, or if you've got a team that is two of you on that team, you can share, and it's almost real time. So basically you can update it, and it's basically co-authoring. And I think if people can demonstrate those quick wins, Terry, it doesn't need to be something significant, but I think the best way to get people along the journey with you is for you to actually show them that actually if you make changes, you get benefit from making those changes, and you need to promote that. So you need to work on how you promote that, and whether it be talking at a team session that most organizations have. I think people don't know what they don't know. And that's the reality out there. So I think if people can just say, I'd like to, or maybe you can contact one of your team leads and say, could we leave 5 or 10 minutes in our team meetings to discuss some new interesting ways of working? And you don't have to talk about innovation per se, because innovation scares people, but just new ways of working. And people then start communicating that. I actually think that's some of the best way to start changing and shifting that culture. Yeah. And, I have seen over the years, sometimes those people that are not wedded at all come along for the journey because they also have complete fear of missing out. That is where the beauty of our competitive natures come in terms of legal. It's like, I'm not willing to put myself on the line and do this first up, but then I'm absolutely willing to go and do it once I know that the others have had success. So it's about having the comfort to also express what you've done and that you have changed something that it has a meaningful outcome. But again, when you do that, I do think one needs to think about that baseline. So when you go and talk about the innovation or new way of working or that quick win that you've got, you need to really think about presenting to the audience what has made this better. Like, why is this a better way of doing things?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other part of that, and I'm thinking particularly if you're within a firm or organization here, is helping to overcome the fear factor by having that follow up, and maybe it's individual intention, and attention. I guess it goes back to resources, but just to be able to say to someone, okay, so you saw this in this prezzo and it's exciting, isn't it? Now let's actually do it. Let's take the lead and actually do it. Yeah,
absolutely. And the other way to do things is sharing a bit of thought leadership. There is so much. Terry, the centre puts out the most amazing thought leadership in the space, but actually sharing that internally also drives that, because again, I go back to you don't know what you don't know. And unless you're exposed to this, I'm fortunate. I do this day in and day out, but I'm also aware that my fellow partners at work don't do this day in and day out. So it's my responsibility to then communicate it and to share the learnings that I have and the new ways of working and the like. And I think if everyone takes on as they can be responsible for that, you can actually, have quite a significant shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to pick up on that communication one because, in, for example, the incubator program, we speak quite a bit about communication. And I think that, sometimes, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, you get absorbed by your own project.
Yeah.
And so you kind of forget that you've got to take people on that journey with you. So could you just speak or expand, and I know you've touched on it many, many times throughout the session, but just the importance of that almost consistency of communication and tailoring that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so critical. Any innovation agenda requires consistency in communication and just general communication. Whether it be around communicating when people give you ideas and going back to them and talking about, thank you for your idea, acknowledging it. People like to be acknowledged, and then also telling them how it's actually progressing or what stage it's in the process. One thing I've learned from a communication point of view is people do not like to be in the dark. Even if you don't have a good answer for them, rather communicate that answer communicate that to them. Even if you might say to them, and I've had to do this, I've had to say, thank you for your fantastic idea. Given constraints we have, and we've got 200 ideas sitting there, yours has been prioritized for next year, December, or whatever that looks like. But just having clarity, again, I go back to lawyers typically hate any ambiguity. So the more forthright you can be with communications is important. But as another thing for communications, we have a regular team meeting, for example, and we also open it up to lawyers, and we communicate and we talk about some of the recent events that are happening in sort of like a legal innovation landscape and stuff. So again, that communication in terms of that, I've got a regular newsletter that we send out, and our firm knows that it comes out sort of quarterly, sometimes even less than that, and it's got a lot of information in there. So that consistency of communication, but just being front of mind. We land ourselves at team meetings and think about different avenues in which you can communicate. Communicate doesn't only mean you have to send it via email. You might have some channels like Workplace, for example, that you can send regular updates to. You might have, team meetings that you can go to regularly. Again, just think about the different forum to enable you to have those communications with them and do it on a consistent basis. It's like anything, out of sight, out of mind.
Absolutely. I want to pick up in part of a question because it follows on directly from what you were just saying. And that is, how do you best communicate the setbacks or the failures? And I guess maybe even the question before that is, do you, which I'm going to say yes to, but I think you agree. But how do you communicate those? And I suppose it's, how do you wrap it in a way that doesn't make your project look like it's all failing, but that it's a natural evolution and a good progression to do that?
Yeah, I think one needs to set expectations of that early on. So I think don't wait for your project to fail. Exactly what I said before, explain to people that it's not linear in nature, that it is that curviness. And if you set the expectation up front saying, not everything's going to work. And I've had those frank conversations up front early, and then it makes the conversation around when things don't work a lot easier. And I also say when you do have to communicate it, it's a lovely way of saying, actually we've learned more probably as a team by the failure than what we had on many of our successes, because you learn what not to do as well. So I think there is more of a tolerance, but you have to embed that as a culture within your organization. And I would say the earlier you can start doing that, the better, because it is tough to do sometimes in the spur of the moment, like when it actually has all gone pear-shaped. The only thing I will say about that, Terry, as well, is I think the challenge with failure is fine, but failing early is important.
Yeah.
So there is sometimes, unfortunately, a view that if we continue going, we might turn it round. And I think if one piece of feedback I'd give to everyone on the session is think hard about that, that dialogue, because often quite early that things are going to fail, and there's that famous mantra about if you're going to fail fast, and I truly believe that it is better to pull the plug when you've lost less money and you can see it not working, or maybe you just need to take a break from it and actually pivot completely, or you realize you've made an error and you needed to do some more upfront planning, or whatever that looks like. Don't let it go constantly thinking that it's going to turn around, because by and large they don't turn around. So have the courage to pull it early.
And as you were saying during the session, don't love your idea so much that you're just not prepared to give it up, right?
Absolutely. And don't take it personally. I think that's the other issue. I think sometimes we do take the stuff personally. It happens, it happens in legal matters. Why shouldn't it happen in innovation matters? People make, it doesn't work always. And there's no one way of doing things. I think that's what innovation, what can be quite challenging for people is, I might do things very differently to you, might do things, Terry, differently, to Katrina doing things there, to Joy doing that. Everyone does things differently. And that's okay, because we all will come up with slightly different outputs. But sometimes then we feel it quite personally, oh, well, I've set this up and if this fails, it won't be good. I do think though, if you can, to that point, if you can do those quick wins early on and try to do something that will succeed, which projects are hard, which ones that are going to be very simple and you can get them over the line, start with those. Do not start with the ones that you potentially could fail on, because that will be very challenging to come right on.
But it's also, as you say, it can sometimes be a trap for particularly law firms, I think, where they see an innovation that's happened in a different firm and it's just kind of, can we just put that in a box and bring it over here without going through that, really quite serious customization process, and it may not work at all in your firm for your clients, by the way.
Absolutely.
So let me pick up the first part of this question, and it's kind of digging a little bit deeper on the earlier one, which is, what happens if you are in that situation where there is real inertia and resistance to change? So I know change management is close to your heart and an integral part of this discussion. So what do you do in that situation?
Firstly, I have to say, you need to be thick-skinned to do some of this stuff. Okay, so I think everyone who's on this journey needs to understand that it's not always a bed of roses, and it can be hard work. I think what you need to do is generally, if there is resistance to change or complete inertia, my view would be that you would still find the odd few people here and there that do not have that, and you need to go in search of those people. You need to almost get that tribe of people that do not have inertia and aren't completely against a change, and work with them. You are not going to convert the ones that are absolutely against the stuff. What you do by then getting the coalition of the willing, I like to call it, is you then work together and try and promote it through that. And then you demonstrate to those who are not interested what the benefits have been. And that is how you bring people along for the journey. And you still, by the end of the journey, will not have everyone on that journey. There are some people that are incapable of changing the ways of their working. But if you can start shifting it. And if you can find somebody also in a leadership position that has your same mindset, that will be helpful. Because as much as we don't like to think it, leadership does drive change. I mean, I'm very fortunate in my organization is that we have got such strength in leadership for innovation. The only question I get asked is, are we doing enough? So I've got the reverse problem. And that's not to say that everyone is on board, but I have enough. But to find people in a leadership capacity that have a passion for this, and that you can at least, even if they're not 100% of the way there, even if they're 70% of the way there, that you can work for, but they can be your champion. Because if you can find champions around an organization that can help you along the way, that is how you get buy-in. That is how you change the narrative. It's them that then can, start slowly shifting mindsets around them. And it means that you don't have to do it yourself.
And I think it's, look, I just want to underscore that point, because I think that sometimes we can spend an enormous amount of time and resources, human and otherwise, on dealing with the outliers. So the folks that you will literally never change. And we forget that if we could redirect all of that energy, as you're suggesting, to the folks that might be able to move the needle forward, even if it's incremental, it's moving. And, you know, that's just so important.
Absolutely. And also just bear in mind, particularly if you're in a team structure, you don't always need to have everyone on that team buying in. You might have only 1 out of 5, but one's enough to change the discussion.
Yeah.
So if you, if you focus in on those, I think that can be really powerful.
Yeah. And as you say, building those champions, because they will probably be in a bunch of different places where you can't be all the time.
Absolutely.
Speaking about this as well. Karen,
and that's where communication comes in, Terry, as well. So then you need to constantly communicate with those champions. So even branded as something, I mean, branding has its place in terms of, so 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we had a GTI unit, which is basically, and that was our first innovation pieces, even before my team was developed. And it was basically a community of people who were like-minded at Gilbert and Tobin. And we started out with 15, 20 of us, okay? And we're now at about 170 of us. So it's just to give you an idea. But we branded it, and we had cool little t-shirts. Didn't cost a lot of money. Like, it wasn't, we're not talking about, it has to be thousands and thousands of dollars, but we started making a presence, and that is important.
Yeah. It's making me think that we need a line of merchandising for the Centre for Legal Innovation.
I'm pro the merchandise.
Oh gosh, yeah, no, absolutely. Here's another question. Yes. I'll throw at you, if I may. Any strategies for minimising the volume on the outliers, as they often have the loudest voices? So how do we minimise the naysayers, if you like, in terms of maybe their reach, but certainly their noise?
Yeah, it's a hard one. As I said to you, I think you need to try and get someone in a leadership position that can equally go at, to promote it. And then I think the best way to keep people quiet is when you demonstrate that you've delivered value.
Yeah, absolutely.
So find something and do it. And don't, sometimes I think we think so hard about trying an improvement idea. If you want to keep it quiet initially, and then once you've achieved it, then, scream it and shout it and whatever. And also I think if you've got a leader in the mix, if they can subtly send out some thought leadership on how the legal industry is changing. And, often I find if people think it's going to harm the bottom line, they become far more invested in the process. And also, if you can somehow get, clients are all over this space as well. Yeah. So if you can try, that's another really interesting avenue, because if a client is particularly interested in particular areas of innovation or whatever, if you again can demonstrate that actually, if you do not engage in this, it might result in reduction in clients, etc. And there's lots of thought leadership on this. And there's lots of, it's just factually the case. I mean, I'm on every panel submission and every, engagement piece now. That did not take place 5 years ago. Now, that is demands of the client. That's not G&T's side of things, but it just demonstrates the changing environment in which we operate. So I think if that can be communicated in a subtle way, I think that can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's business as usual now. The norm of business as usual has changed.
Yeah.
I could quite happily, as you know, sit here and chat with you for 4 or 5 hours, but sadly, I guess we need to start drawing it to a close. And so last call out for any last Q&A if you have them. But while we're just doing that round, Karen, just wanted to thank you again. The work that you're doing at G&T is truly amazing. The work that you're doing personally is truly amazing. And certainly in the Australian, if not the international arena, I think really paving the way and showing what a law firm can do, that innovative law firms do actually exist and they do actually operate in the way that you do and the function that you lead. So I wanted to thank you in that way as well, because I think you are becoming a case study in many respects for a different way of working and operating at a law firm. So thank you for that. And of course, we remain incredibly grateful and delighted to have you co-leading our advisory board as well. So with that having been said, I wanted to thank everyone as well for attending today. Hope you've enjoyed this session. Hope it really kicks off your innovation projects or fuels them, as the case may be. And do please keep innovating, because it is just so incredibly important in our industry today. If you'd like to learn more about the Centre, of course, visit our website or LinkedIn, Twitter or Facebook, where you'll find these sorts of sessions announced on a regular basis. So again, thank you so much, Karen. Thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.